Hi, I'm James from James's Train Parts, and this is Wakefield, and this is its story. So here we are at the McKinley Railway, and here is Wakefield, all installed. Now all looks nice and ready to go, but how did we get there? Well, you may remember a few months ago I was showing you the video how we built this in the Model Railway Solutions workshop. We built everything, including all the bench work, we laid all the track, put all the wiring in, did all the testing, and made a fully functioning railway before it came here. So just to recap on the building process, the four baseboards, two of them were built first so I could start laying track, and then the other two were built afterwards. We started around the corner on the left, on the side there, came through to here. This is the joint between the second and third board, and then the joint between the third and the fourth is all the way down at the front right here. And this is probably the most complex board in the sense that there's lots of double slips through here, lots of point motors, lots of wiring, but all the wires actually run out from the second board, and they run out roughly here. Just as a bit of fun before we carry on, have a think about all the point motors and all the electrical equipment on this railway. How many wires do you reckon come into this railway? I'll tell you towards the end of the video. So what do we have here? We've got the four boards. Obviously we have some joints which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then we've got all the various components. We've got point motors, we have uncouplers, and you may not be able to see them too clearly because we've painted the track, but there's an uncoupler there, and there's several, there's another one here, so on and so forth. We have RFID readers, which have been covered in other videos. There's one tucked away there, there's another one tucked away there. We've got wiring for signals, we've got all the track wiring for all the individual sections, all the different areas, and all these wires have to come together and be fed out to the other side of this panel where all the equipment is. So all the track work that's on here is Pico, it's code 100. All the points are large radius with a few exceptions. For example, there's a medium radius here just to fit it into the yard. We went with large radius points for reliability. We're going to be pushing long trains through here. We want everything to stay on the track. All the uncouplers are made by KD, they're electromagnets. All the RFIDs are made by Excel. So as I mentioned, we're using the Pico points. These are all electrofrog points as well. Once again, that's the best for giving you the best electrical contact with the locomotives as they're running across. And they're all powered by tortoise point motors. And all the wires, once again, run back through and out into the main control system. Now the KD uncouplers that we've got in the various places around the layout are all powered through a switch that goes on the front. And you probably can't see from the angle that you are now there, but we have panels that are going to be mounted on the front of the layout, and we haven't decided quite where they're going to go yet. So we have little bits of paper on the front at the moment just to say this is where we think they're going to go, so when we can start spacing things out and seeing where people are going to stand, this is where it's going to work. And what I've done is the circuit board that's on the underside of the layout is designed so we can plug a switch in and we can just lengthen the wire to go wherever we need it to be. So we haven't got to modify anything other than having the switch and plugging it in. And those circuit boards are all underneath the layout, and later on you'll see a video of a train running under the layout and you'll see all the green lights on, and those are the boards for the uncouplers. The fascia on the front here has got a little 10mm lip at the front just to stop trains and things falling off, and this will be the finished face of the railway once it's all been painted and made to look nice. And we can have the various holes for the various buttons along the front. There will be a small control panel which is going to go in roughly here just for the operator of this end of the layout, but the main control panel, as you can see, is up on the wall up here. So this panel is an easy reach when you're standing in front of it. It will control every point on this section of the railway. It'll also show if there's any short sections where a train has come off the track, that sort of thing. We have sensors for that, and there are the buttons for the arrivals and departure tracks. These tracks down here, arrivals 1, arrivals 2, and another arrivals and departures tracks there. That's where the trains will come in automatically with the computer and then can be dispatched again with the computer back onto the railway. So as you also see on this track here, it's been painted, and that was done before we brought it into this room. It was painted with an aerosol, and that's not something you want to do in a confined space like this one, so it was all painted outside. So by simply spraying the track with the aerosol and then immediately following on behind with a cloth to wipe the top of the rails clean, you can easily achieve a nice weathered look, which also covers up any soldered joints, wire joints, and just things that stand out when everything looks as a brand new piece of track. Very important tip, when you're using a bit of cloth to wipe the rails, make sure you use something that's lint free. Personally, I like to use an old t-shirt or a piece of cloth. If you use something like a kitchen towel and you run it along, it'll catch on rail joints, nails, various things, and it'll tear, and you'll end up with bits of cloth and tissue stuck on the paint, which you don't want. So always use something that's lint-free and pretty strong, like a t-shirt. So once we've painted the track, we then have the fun of getting it up the stairs, coming up around the corners past all the balustrades, and then bringing it into this room. And we brought everything in the order that it was built in. So the first piece was the piece that goes off around the corner. The second piece is this corner piece, and it joins right here. And at that point, we put a battling across the main structure behind for it to sit on, and we've started putting these legs on the front. Now the important thing with these legs is they do not connect back to Hades below. That way, vibrations and movement of people leaning on or knocking the layout are not going to transfer down into Hades and knock any trains off down there, and vice versa. Anything going on down there, the vibrations are not going to come up onto this layout at the top. With the first two pieces installed, I could then start connecting the wires up underneath, which we're going to show you in a minute, and we move on to the third board, which is the largest piece, and this piece right here, and it jumps all the way down to this joint here. Again, we have a batten on the back that the back of the layout is sat on, and then we have legs out the front for it as well. Now these are tucked underneath just so your legs aren't going to catch them as you're walking through. The last thing you want is somebody kicking the leg and everything vibrating, but this is nice and solid. And then the fourth piece is the corner piece that runs around the corner, and that would be the end of that scenic section. What we've done, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is we've joined that back onto the main railway just so we can use this in a temporary phase, and we'll cover that in a minute. So how do we join the baseboards together? Well, here on the main joint between the second and third board, we have the joints, and you may remember from the video that was taken in the workshops at MRS, I left a gap between the rails that were fixed down to allow for a joint. And what I've done is these sections of rails that were the right size to fit in, I've sprayed them before they were fitted, placed them in, slid all the fish plates into place, and then I've soldered one end. The reason why I've only soldered one end is it allows for expansion at the other. The other reason why I solder them is that these short sections of rail become part of the main section for conductivity, making them all the same rail. So that's how we did the joints. Now what about the wiring? Well, you may recall when you saw the baseboards up at Model Railway Solutions that we had lots of wires hanging off the baseboards. Now what I've done, all the wires, for example, for this section here, all come together in a loom, and when they get to this point, if the wires are not having anything to do with the neighbouring boards, they form a loom which is hanging free, and then when we install it, it's fed through holes in the neighbouring baseboard and out the back. But there are some wires that need to bridge from this board to this board. So what I've done is on the end of what would be the primary board, in this case board number 2, I've screwed on a solder strip, which you can see in this image. And the wires from board number 2 were soldered to the solder strip in the workshop, and the wires from board number 3 were left loose. Then, when board number 3 was installed and screwed together, the wires were then soldered to the solder strip. Everything was tested to make sure everything was right and in the right place, and then it was painted with electrical insulation tape just to make sure that everything was covered and not going to cause any shorts. Of course, the important thing to do before the railway actually came was to make sure everything worked, and that was done in the workshops at MRS. Everything was fully connected up in a temporary stage, and we ran trains on it. We tested all the point motors, made sure everything threw the right way, made sure there was no shorting, made sure that all the sections were feeding back to saying the trains were in certain places, and everything was thoroughly tested, and we actually had a sheet that we went through and we ticked off to say yes, everything is correct. That way, when everything arrived here at McKinley, it really was plug and play. It was mess free, there was hardly any work to be done apart from screwing together, soldering a few wires that needed to be connected, and that was it. All the main work is now happening on the other side of this board. So this is the first board that we installed as part of Wakefield. And what you can see here, this is the head shunt operating the main yard. These are the 4 storage tracks that we call A yard. And this line on the top is the line that runs off to Halifax and runs round to the next part of the layout, which I'm now building at Model Railway Solutions. Following this line back down, it runs into the station. And you can see the different heights that we've had to build. This is nice and flat at this level. This is flat here and starts sloping down and around here. And this is on a continual gradient running up because Halifax is higher than Wakefield. So here we are at the end of Wakefield. This is the A yard that we spoke about earlier. Now with it all installed, We want to run trains on it to see how it works, but the problem we have is the tracks that run down to Sheffield, which is behind me, are not going to be installed yet. This section that's running through right in front of us is where Wakefield B is going to be, and the tracks that run from Wakefield run under Wakefield B, which I haven't built yet. But in order to test it, we need some temporary track, so we've installed a shoe fly, and this is what you can see down in here. So everything running up from my left, running up to here, is going to be permanent track, but from where you can see these raised sections on this lovely straight piece running through, that's actually a shoe fly. That's a temporary section of track that we've built. The track is only roughly laid in there at the moment, but my next job is to lay that properly, wire it up, and it means we can run trains all the way from behind me, all the way up into Wakefield. So as I mentioned earlier on, Wakefield is higher than the rest of the railway. Halifax is going to be higher still. Now that comes up with a problem. Getting the gradients correct between the different parts of the railway, and that's really important. If you've got a steam locomotive that's pulling a long freight train up, if you've got sudden inclines that are steep, the steam engine is going to struggle, even a diesel as well, depending on how steep it is. So what we had to do was calculate where we needed everything to be to make sure we had clearance underneath to get your hands in, but then also the gradient wasn't too steep. Once we figured all this out, we then had to make sure we built it in the right place. And that was done using a laser level, and you can see our level clamped to the side of the timber just above the shoe fly. With Wakefield being flat, we were then able to work out the gradient from Wakefield down to Sheffield, and that gradient runs all the way down through the shoe fly round to Sheffield behind me. And what we were able to do is work out exact levels at various points along the shoe fly we could test using the laser level to ensure that we had a constant grade all the way down. With all the track down and wired, we can then run trains all the way from Sheffield up into Wakefield for testing. That isn't the end of the story. The shoe fly, as I say, is only temporary, and as I am now currently building Halifax up at Model Railway Solutions, as soon as that's finished, it can be installed in here to replace the shoe fly, and that will be the final railway, and that'll be the last part to complete the McKinley Railway. And finally, how many wires were going into Wakefield? Well, if you came anywhere near 224, you'd be spot on.